Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast. Today, we are learning how to apply the Mamba mentality in photography. So let's get into it.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast, a weekly podcast for those who believe that moments matter most and that a beautiful photo is more than just a sum of its settings. A show for those who want to do more with the gear they have to take better photos today. And now, your host, Raymond Hatfield.
Hey, welcome back to this episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. I am your host, Raymond Hatfield, and today we have something really special for you all that I'm so excited to get into. Today, I have the pleasure of interviewing sports photographer Andy Bernstein. Now, Andy has been shooting for more than 40 years, specializes in basketball, and has become an institution in the NBA. In fact, he's a Naismith Hall of Fame photographer, as in the same governing body that chooses what NBA players will be immortalized forever in the Hall of Fame, chose Andy for a similar distinction for his contribution to the game of basketball. So whether or not you are a sports fan, and I'll be honest, I mean, you know that I love the Dodgers, but I really don't know anything about basketball. The experience behind the camera and the stories that Andy will tell today are sure to help you no matter where you are in your photography journey. Now, as we will get into, Andy was looked at as kind of Kobe Bryant's personal photographer, having taken his first official NBA rookie photo all the way to taking the last photo of Kobe on the court as a Laker. Now, Kobe Bryant was known as the Mamba, and he worked with Andy hand in hand to create the book, The Mamba Mentality, which utilized the vast collection of images that Andy had captured of Kobe over the years. Now, this is an opportunity that, so few of us get, to be able to capture a long-term project, let alone one centered around arguably one of the greatest athletes that the world has ever seen. Truly incredible. So if you get the chance, pick up the Mamba Mentality, which is available on Amazon. I have a link to it in the show notes if you want to check it out. Great work. Now, this week here in America is Thanksgiving. We're going to be celebrating Thanksgiving, which is, I think, the perfect time, as many of you would probably agree, to reflect on everything that we are truly thankful for. Now, as many of you know, earlier this year, Kobe Bryant passed away along with his daughter in just a horrible helicopter accident. And honestly, even though I'm not a fan of basketball, this is still something that I think about quite often as just simply a reminder that tomorrow is never promised, no matter who you are. And while some people may look at photography as just simply pressing a button, I guarantee you that Kobe's family looks at the images that Andy was able to capture over the years as something more valuable than, well, anything at this point, honestly. So let that act as a reminder to you to keep shooting. Just keep shooting, whatever it is, just keep shooting. Because one day, those photos that you are capturing now could be an heirloom to somebody else. So anyway, with that, I'm so excited for this. Let's go ahead and get on into today's interview with Andy Bernstein. As a Hall of Fame photographer, which is a huge accomplishment here, you've been shooting for more than 40 years, Andy. Mm-hmm. You took Kobe Bryant's first NBA photo, and you also took the last photo of him walking off the court as a professional basketball player. I want to know, did that 14-year-old kid, Andy Bernstein from Brooklyn, who just picked up his camera, ever imagine that camera in his hand would get him so far and make such a big impact in the world of sports?
Well, that's a great question, and I wish I had known, it's a letter to my younger self kind of thing. But the answer, Raymond, to that is no. I knew that I loved photography, that as soon as I picked up a camera at 14, my dad gave me an old Canon TL camera, and we made a trip out to the Western United States, to all the national parks. And I just really loved the feeling of having the camera in my hand. I loved the feeling of seeing something and then translating it through the camera. You know, the camera was a kind of a vehicle for whatever I saw in my head. And then seeing the end result when you got the film back, you know, that, wow, that actually was what I was thinking about or seeing or learning, wow, maybe I should have taken a different angle or approached it differently or different time of day or whatever, right? But I had no idea. I had no idea that photography could be a career other than our family friend who was like a wedding and bar mitzvah photographer. I mean, I had no idea that photography was a business, that a huge business, you know, commercially, that every single product had to be photographed in some way for its packaging. You know, every magazine cover had to be photographed by somebody. You know, every billboard you saw, car ad, no matter what it is, if it had a photograph on it, somebody, and you know, I kind of had this epiphany later, but some professional photographer had to take that picture, you know. And then, you know, news photography as well, and war photography, sports photography, all that stuff in photojournalism. So it really started with sort of, I don't know, a personal attachment to the camera itself, as a way to express myself at 14 years old. And then that continued through high school. And when I decided to go to college, through a weird set of circumstances, I didn't pick a college that actually had any photography classes. But we did have a college newspaper, a daily paper, and that you know, fed my my desire and also my interest even more.
When you were 14, would you consider yourself a creative child or somebody with an eye for creativity, or were you more kind of by the books, technical aspect?
Oh, I had no idea technically what I was doing. No. I mean, you got to think about, this was you know, in the era of manual focus, manual exposure. You had to have the right film for the right lighting situation, you know. I mean, I didn't know anything from anything. I mean, we went out, my dad and I went out to the national parks, and of course everything was daylit, you know, or it was at night, but it was lit by the sun one way or the other. So we just used daylight film. I didn't know like tungsten film existed. I didn't know about high-speed film. We shot Kodachrome the whole time, Kodachrome 64.
Slide film.
Yeah, slide film.
I don't even think many photographers today know about you know, different lighting film stocks.
Right. And so we bought, my dad and I bought probably, I don't know, maybe 60 or so rolls of Kodachrome in the you know, yellow box with the orange writing, and with the film came a mailer. I mean, you probably know about this, but I don't think the listeners know about this, that when you bought Kodachrome film, and I think even some of their other films as well, it came with a mailer, a prepaid mailer, that as soon as you would shoot the film, you'd stick the film in the mailer, find a mailbox anywhere in the United States, stick it in there. It went back to Kodak in Rochester, and it was sent to your home, right? So that's how film was, at least Kodachrome film was developed. Kodak was they had the monopoly on Kodachrome. So you could send black and white or other kinds of slide film to your local photo shop, but you couldn't send Kodachrome. I guess you could through your photo shop, because they would then send it to Kodak, you know.
Right. What a weird system.
It was weird. Yeah. And they had, like I said, the monopoly. They owned the technology. So this is kind of a funny story, which I've told before, and you probably have heard this, but I don't know if your listeners have. But so we get all these mailers, and we're, you know, in Grand Teton National Park, we're in Grand Canyon, and my dad shoots a roll of film in his Canon camera. I shoot a roll of film in my Canon camera. We go to the next national park, we stick it in the mailer, you know, and put it in. I mean, we didn't think we'd ever see it again, quite frankly. I mean, you're in like Yellowstone National Park, and there's like a mailbox, you know, who knows? How's that ever going to get to Rochester and then get to my house? But anyway, we did that, and we were gone for like 2.5, 3 weeks, and we come back from the trip, and there's this stack my mom like piled up this stack of yellow boxes. It literally came in these yellow boxes, and there's a stack of them, and it's not differentiated by whose film it was or anything like that or where it was shot. So we start rifling through the boxes. My dad's looking through them, I'm looking through them, and my, my dad's like, oh, look at this picture of Mount Rainier. This is unbelievable. And look at this Old Faithful picture. And blah, blah. And I said, Dad, hold on, can I see that box for a second? And I take the box from him and I'm looking through it. And then I see that there's a picture of him like in front of Old Faithful. There's a picture of him like in front of, the Grand Canyon. I said, but Dad, that's my roll of film because you're in the pictures. And so he's like, wow, you're pretty good eye, kid. You were pretty good. He thought he was like this great, like sort of amateur photographer. He was really a doctor and he should have kept it, on his day job. But anyway, that really convinced me, it was very empowering. It was very cool to see the end result because you're reliving this great trip and a great bonding experience with your dad, but also you're seeing like, wow, I actually took that picture. I created that. It's pretty cool.
Yeah, that's got to be a good feeling. So
Yeah.
early on, obviously, you go out and you're photographing wildlife, you're photographing nature. Tell me how all this transitioned into where you're at today with sports.
Well, boy, that's a big question. So I ended up going, like I said earlier, to the University of Massachusetts. Not because they had a photography program, they even have a photography class in their communications department. It was close to home. It was in Massachusetts, but it was only 3.5 hours from my house. So it was literally closer than almost any state University of New York college. And I didn't really want to go to college with the same kids I went to high school with. So it was a whole different set of friends, and they were all into the Boston sports teams and all that stuff. And we hated them, being a New Yorker. But so that was kind of fun, bonding with those guys. And I gravitated towards the college newspaper because I went to a very big high school in Brooklyn, and we had a monthly newspaper and we had a yearbook. And I ended up in senior year being the editor of both. So we had a paper at UMass called the UMass Daily Collegian, came out 5 days a week. And when we were in Western Massachusetts at the time, our college paper was the town's newspaper. Like Amherst, it wasn't an Amherst newspaper, it was the UMass paper.
Oh, wow.
And because the next biggest paper, the Boston Globe, had to be trucked in from Boston. It was printed in Boston. So it was an afternoon paper. Back in the day, you had your morning edition, afternoon edition of papers. But in our area in Western Mass, when 90 miles west of Boston, we were it. So it was a very prestigious paper. It won a lot of awards. And I walked in there. It was like the second week of my freshman year. And I met a guy named Chris Bourne, the photo editor. And he looked up from his desk and he saw me. I had a camera around my Canon TL camera around my neck, and he said, "Hey kid, you a photographer?" And I said, "Yeah." He goes, "You want to work for me?" He was like desperate. And I said, "Yeah, that would be great." He goes, "Go out and shoot this." I don't even know what it was. I mean, it literally gave me an assignment that moment to go shoot something. So, I was versed in using the darkroom. I had to get familiar with their darkroom, but I knew how to process film. I knew how to make prints. He taught me how to work on a deadline, how to work towards the design of the page, if it was a front page picture or whatever. And I shot everything, Raymond. I mean, everything from feature pictures to portraits to news type pictures, college protests going on. Jimmy Carter came through our campus for his 1976 presidential campaign, believe it or not. And I had a front page of that. All the arts events, the theater shows, the dance concerts, the fraternity and sorority parties, and of course sports, and I love sports. I grew up a huge sports fan in New York. I was always the shortest kid on my block, so I knew I would never play like varsity, junior varsity. I was always the last kid picked, but I love sports. And sports became kind of my thing, although I did love doing all of the other things that I just described. But I really enjoyed going out and shooting the football games, even in the cold, the basketball games, shot hockey, women's sports, a lot of sports I had never shot before. I never shot rugby. Lacrosse was very big, up in the Northeast. sports like that, tennis. And then I came out to California the summer of my, after my sophomore years, the summer of 77. And my sister is a little known fact, but my sister is an actress. And her name is Dee Dee Khan. And she was in this little movie that you might have heard of called Grease.
I think I've heard of it. Yeah.
And she actually played the role of Frenchie in Grease.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, the pink hair, the whole thing. She says my sister, my oldest sister. So I came out to spend the summer with her. I mean, just literally, I had nothing to do that summer. And she said, come on out. I'm filming the movie. You can stay with me. You can come to the set. So I ended up going to the set with her every day. And I brought my camera. It was very loosey-goosey there. I brought my camera, and I gravitated towards the set photographer, and I didn't know at the time, but a very famous, what they call the unit photographer, the guy who's on set every single day taking the still photos. His name was Alan Pape. He had shot almost every amazing, great film for Paramount and others, but Paramount was his main client. And anyway, I was kind of, a little bit bold, and he was very approachable, incredibly approachable. We would all sit down for lunch together, and he saw me with my camera. He says, I see you taking pictures here and there. He said, why don't you, get them developed, bring them in and show them to me, at lunch sometime. So I did. I found a dark room in Hollywood and rented it, and I went and developed some of my pictures. They're all black and white. And I brought them, and he really looked at them, and he gave me some pointers. And then he said to my sister, he said, your brother's got a pretty good eye. I see a lot of young photographers, and he definitely has something. And, maybe he should take a bona fide class and learn, all the ins and outs of photography. Because keep in mind, I was really learning on the job at the college newspaper. So he recommended a night class. I believe it was on a Wednesday night at Art Center College of Design in Pasadena. And I went up there and I enrolled. I took the class. It was an intro to photography class, kind of like what you're doing here, but back in the dark ages when we didn't have internet,
You had to meet in person,
literally go to a class.
Like Neanderthals.
And the teacher was great and gave us there was probably, 12 of us in the class, and it was a weekly class, and I loved doing the assignments. But I got to tell you, Raymond, after the first class, my sister was living in Hollywood. And if anybody had ever been to Hollywood, they know the famous Sunset Strip, right? My sister lived right off of Sunset Strip. So you had to drive down Sunset Strip to get to her apartment. And I remember coming down the hill from Pasadena where the school was, and then getting on Sunset Strip, and then it's full of billboards. I mean, still is today, but it's very famous for having billboards. And I honestly remember looking up and seeing these billboards and seeing, wow, that somebody took that Marlboro ad, and somebody took that Dodge truck ad, and somebody took that perfume billboard and that travel one. And it was like the biggest epiphany of my life, honestly. It was like this giant light bulb went off in my head. And it convinced me that I could have a career in photography somehow. And sports, didn't know it was going to be in sports. I thought it could be more in news and documentary. I was leaning a little bit also towards film and video. Video was kind of, at its sort of infancy then. So I went back to UMass, and I applied to Art Center to transfer, and they accepted me, and they accepted me, though, for the following summer. So I would essentially have to spend my entire junior year at UMass. And at some point, I believe in November, I got a letter in the mail. There was no email. There was no texting. None of that stuff. I got a letter in the mail saying, hey, we have an opening now. Somebody dropped out for the spring term because Art Center is trimesters. And the spring term started in February. Would you be willing to, come early in February? And I'm like, yeah, and I hadn't even taken my finals yet at the beginning of my junior year. I think I actually blew off my finals, quite frankly. And it was a fun, last month of just hanging out with my friends. I mean, of course I went to class and everything. And I moved to LA. It was sometime in January of 78. It was the famous blizzard of 78 in the Northeast, which at the time was the biggest dump of snow in the history of the Northeast. I landed in LA. God's honest truth, it was 84 degrees. And
How
I'm
great
like,
is that?
this is a no-brainer. I mean, even if this photography thing doesn't work out, I mean, it's 84 degrees in January, really?
Yeah.
I'd have to wear a parka and like, my car isn't buried under snow. Anyway, started Art Center that February and never looked back. And anyway, sports, to answer your question in a really roundabout way, I was the black sheep of my class, quite frankly. Art Center is a very commercial, advertising-oriented university, college, and photojournalism was not particularly encouraged at Art Center, and sports was like the poor stepchild of photojournalism. But I did have two teachers that believed in me, that pushed me, that wouldn't let me get discouraged. And also, I'm a Brooklyn guy, so you tell me like I can't do something, it only fuels me even more. And my one teacher, Bill Robbins, really took me under his wing, and I ended up working for him in his studio and learning the business of photography. But also, he introduced me to a friend of his who was a staff photographer for Sports Illustrated, and he then in turn introduced me to the local LA Sports Illustrated photographers, and that's where I really learned everything I needed to know, and convinced me that that's where I wanted to go with my career. So I used my mentorship that Bill and my other teacher, Jim Kakavo, was so generous, but also the photographers I worked for. I was like a sponge. I took it all in. I saw how they worked. I saw how they interacted with the athletes, how they prepared, how they dealt with the PR people, how they shipped their film, how they took care of their equipment, And then I learned the very specialized technique of lighting indoor arenas for hockey and basketball, primarily with strobes, which only a few people in the country knew.
Mm-hmm.
So that opened all the doors for me. And I'm extremely grateful to the people at the Forum, the Lakers and Kings at the time, who, really took a liking to this young, sort of aggressive photographer who was sort of relentless, and that led to my introduction to the NBA in '83, which was my first gig, which is the NBA All-Star Game in '83 at the Forum, and it all just kind of mushroomed from there, quite frankly.
So many questions came out of that. Oh my goodness. I think one of the biggest ones, which I had actually planned on bringing up later, but since you brought it up, we're diving straight in.
Yeah.
A few months ago, when I had the pleasure of interviewing John Su, who is, as many know, the lead photographer right now for the Dodgers, who is currently celebrating his World Series win.
Yeah.
I asked him what's one of the things that he learned while shooting under you, because you two worked together, and he brought up the time that you two had worked shooting. I guess you two had met at USC women's basketball, and you brought him in shooting some Clippers games, and he said that from the technical side, the thing that you taught him that helped him the most was learning how to strobe arenas. Now, many new photographers who are listening to this might think, well, the only time that you need to use a flash is when there's not enough light to get some sort of base exposure.
Right.
So to ask here, let me ask, why now, when we live in a world where cameras can shoot up to ISO 3 million, literally, why are we still using strobes, and where are you putting these things?
Well, just to give people sort of an overview, back in the day, and we're talking about way back before me in the 60s, John Zimmerman, Neil Leifer, literally the godfathers, of sports photography, Walter Yost, Hy Peskin. I mean, these guys are the Ansel Adams, of sports photography. They all work for Sports Illustrated, and Sports Illustrated sort of invented this technique of bringing these gigantic strobe units in and installing them in the catwalks or the balconies or wherever they could put them, because the lighting in the old arenas was so horrendous and the film wasn't good. I mean, you couldn't shoot action. You need to shoot action around 500th of a second to stop the action, right? Well, you couldn't find film with a high enough, we used to call it ASA, but ISO, that was sensitive enough to stop the action. So by putting these strobes in, for that moment in time when the photographer pushes the shutter button and all of these strobes go off, you're literally just erasing the light that's in the arena, the available light, and you're essentially have this gigantic light source, this big strobe light source. It's like if you took about 300 flashes, like a normal speed light or little
Yes.
flash you would put on top of your camera now, and they all went off at the same time. That's about the amount of light that comes out. And keep in mind, it's about 100 and something feet from the floor to the strobes, and they're all hardwired together, and wires are flown down from the catwalk, and it's a big production. And it was refined down. The equipment got a little bit easier to manage, but still it was like a 4-hour setup. And none of the arenas back when I started, and this is, the late 70s, none of them had permanent installation of strobes. So if the photographer I was working for, let's say, the great Peter Reed Miller, and I was assigned to work with him for tonight's, Lakers game at the Forum, all right, I'll use that example. I would have the strobes probably in my garage, or I'd have to go to his house to get them. And they were in cases. There's probably 12 of these shipping cases. They're about 40, 60 pounds a piece. And you'd have these 4 strobe packs and 4 heads that had to be assembled with tubes and reflectors and clamps and cables. And I would drive them over in my little Volkswagen. I don't know how I got everything in there, to the Forum at like 10 o'clock in the morning, meet up with the rigger, guy named Mark Orsetta, a wonderful guy. And we would, after the teams finished their game day practice, he would literally stand in the middle of the court and rope these strobes up to the catwalk. I'd be at the top, he'd be at the bottom, and he would rope them up. I would take them off, put them on the catwalk. He'd send the other ones up, and I'd spend the rest of the day, and sometimes there were 2 of us, setting these strobes up. And the photographer would come in about 3 o'clock, and I'd have to be done by then, because then I have to get him ready for the game, hook everything up. He would, always do remote cameras. Those would have to be set up. And then I would basically, once everything was set up, the players started arriving around 5:30, then it's, basically game time, and I would camera assist him, changing film throughout the game. If something went wrong, having to fix it, whatever. Back in those days, we'd have to run to the catwalk if a strobe went out or whatever it was.
In the middle of a game.
Yeah. So, and then game is over, right? Photographer goes home. He leaves all the film with me, right? I have to disassemble everything, pack it all up. Then I have to take the film to the airport, usually, and ship it overnight, like by Delta Dash or something, to New York, because it'd have to be processed at the Time Life building in New York the next day to make the magazine deadline. Yeah, it was crazy. It was just nuts. So to answer your question, and I tend to give long answers, Raymond, I'm sorry, but the reason why we use strobes today, right? Yes, you're right. The cameras are so much better. But the quality of light that you get from strobes, you can't duplicate with even the best arena lighting that we have now, which is now they've gone from mercury vapor lights to LED lights, which are really, they're beautiful. The quality of light, the directional, you get a little bit of a highlight, but it doesn't look like strobes. Strobes just have that, that crispness to it. You can shoot at a much lower ISO, which today, honestly, really doesn't matter that much.
Yeah.
But, back in the day, it was the difference of going into the Forum and shooting. I mean, they didn't even make 1600 ISO film in those days. You'd have to shoot like 800 film and push it, or 400 film and push it. And then pray that it wasn't grainy, that it would just all fall apart.
Of
it
course.
got processed and put in the magazine. Like you said, I mean, I just spent time in the bubble shooting available light sometimes at ISO 10,000, and it looked gorgeous.
Wow. Something
But the
that
quality
you never could
of
have imagined.
Right, but the quality of light of strobes is amazing. Still beautiful. Still sort of the quality of choice that the NBA wants, the NHL for the most part wants. A lot of magazines still prefer it, trading cards. A lot of the clients that the leagues have, the NBA and NHL. But the gap has definitely narrowed, and I can see a day where really we move away from strobes, because it's a huge expense, and B, you have to technically, you have to know how to shoot with strobes, because you shoot one picture every 4 seconds. Keep that in mind, because the strobes fire, and then they have to recycle back up. Their energy has to be recycled so you can shoot again. It's not like a little flash, which you can shoot almost with motor drive. So it's a different way of shooting. I see almost the end of the era here as cameras get better and better. We're not there yet, but almost.
Yeah. Oh my goodness. This is, so obviously, 20, 30 years ago, the strobes were to get that good base exposure, to get enough light so that you can capture and freeze motion. And today it's more of an aesthetic choice. And then moving forward, could possibly be phased out.
Yeah, I think so. I think probably could be phased. I mean, it's almost like film, really. Comparison, we were shooting film, exclusively because digital didn't exist. But once we got to the end of the 90s and digital cameras started coming in, and we were playing around with them and then starting to incorporate them into our coverage around 2000. By 2004 or 5, it was almost 80% digital. We're shooting film because we were shooting 2.25 Hasselblad film, which was gorgeous.
Oh, okay.
And then it became necessary to have basically live coverage of what we do, because we couldn't wait for the film to get developed.
Sure.
So we were
the plane ride alone to New York has got to just be nail biting.
Yeah, right. So we at the NBA went full digital. I think it was around 2005-ish. And the only time I've shot film, quite frankly, is back when I did my book with Phil Jackson back in 2010. And I did a portrait series in black and white because I just missed doing it. And I had the luxury of time. But I have not shot an assignment or a game or anything on film 15 years at least.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that kind of brings me to my next question here. As you brought up there, your book, one of your most recent books is The Mamba Mentality, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Could I call you one of the co-authors? Obviously, with Kobe Bryant. Okay, so The Mamba Mentality, co-written with Kobe Bryant, and it's all about how he played, or how he played basketball.
Right.
So the Mamba Mentality is kind of to bring it all together. It's how you approach this obsession with what it is that you love and take it to a place to where you didn't even think was possible to reach that full potential.
Yeah.
Having been with Kobe for so long and other really high-level athletes, how have you used the Mamba Mentality in your own life and career as a photographer to advance yourself?
Oh, great question, Raymond. Well, one of the 4 pillars of the Mamba Mentality is obsession, and I was obsessed. We just talked about it. I mean, once I got my taste of photography and how I could express myself and how cool it was just to be in the darkroom and see something, literally the magic trick of a print appearing before your own eyes, under the red or orange light. It was just unbelievable. But then I became obsessed with it. I mean, I had a camera around my neck every single day in high school, and it became a joke. Like, my friends and the teachers would always kid me. I always had this camera around my neck. And I was obsessed with it. Because I loved it so much and I wanted to learn more and more. And that's why, I ended up making a very difficult decision to change my whole life around it at 19. I was 18 years old, actually, when I made that decision. So, after I met Kobe, when I met Kobe and he was 18, right? And I met him on my set of Media Day in 1996 in his rookie season. And I went to introduce myself, and he said he knew who I was because he had all my posters on his wall as a kid.
Oh, wow.
And I'm thinking, there's something really unique about this kid. I mean, who reads a photo credit on a poster, first of all? But the obsession that he had with his craft, which was so evident from the moment, not only the moment I met him, but when I first saw him on the court. It really, I'm 20 years older than him at the time, and I'm thinking, wow, this is almost a mirror image of how I was at his age, quite frankly. because I was very driven. I wouldn't take no for an answer. I had a chip on my shoulder. I had talent like he did. I was like a caged animal like he was his rookie year because, he wanted to play more and Coach Harris wouldn't play him. And, and I wanted to get published in Sports Illustrated more than anything else in the world. All things come in due time. But so we bonded over that obsession, and that fueled really my career path, quite frankly. And, when I say that I was aggressive, it means that I was determined. I don't like really using the word aggressive because people kind of misconstrue it as being arrogant, right?
Sure.
And maybe I was a little arrogant. I mean, other people would have to tell you that. But I think you have to have a little bit of arrogance because arrogance comes from self-confidence. Mm-hmm. And it also comes from being driven and being sure of yourself and all that. And having a goal in mind, right? My goal was to be a professional photographer. I mean, right in front of me, you can't see it because it's right here, but it is literally painted on my wall in huge letters. Dreams plus goals equals destiny. And that's one of Peter Guber, my good friend and mentor, owner of the Dodgers, owner of the Warriors. He wrote that in his book, and I have taken that to be my mantra in life. Dreams plus goals equals destiny. My photography life started off as a dream. That dream became a goal. What's the goal? The goal was to be a professional photographer in sports. So I made this decision to follow that dream to California to find a school that could help nurture that. And that led to all the doors opening that we just talked about. And destiny, I've been doing this for longer than 40 years. So apparently it was my destiny and continues to be. I still love what I do.
Yeah, I've heard you say on other podcasts and other interviews before that when you received your Hall of Fame award or indoctrination, I suppose, that, and I forget who it was who told you this, but it was that some of your best photos are ahead of you. Is that right?
Yes, that was our great commissioner, Adam Silver.
Yes.
Who took me aside. Adam and the NBA were very generous to make a little cocktail party before the actual Hall of Fame event where I received my award. And there were like 3 or 4 of us who were getting various awards. And Rick Wells, for example, was getting inducted into the Hall of Fame. It was pretty cool. And I'd known Rick my whole career. And he took me aside, congratulated me and said that. He said, Andy, and I'm 37 years into my career at this point, right? And he said, Andy, you had a great career. We still love having you around, and I think your best pictures are in front of you. And for your boss, your ultimate boss, to say that, so it was inspiring. He was throwing the gauntlet down, like, keep it going. Just like David Stern did at the beginning when he really put a lot of confidence in me as a young photographer. David was always really amused by my sort of relentless pursuit of everything having to do with covering the NBA. He loved it. He was a great mentor, a great friend, and we lost him on January 1st this year, and of course followed by the incredibly shocking loss of Kobe and Gigi.
Yes.
3 weeks later. But that was so inspiring when Adam said that to me, and really kind of, it was like almost a second wind, quite frankly, for my career.
Oh, wow. As if you were already feeling kind of like, I got this routine down. This has kind of become just like second nature. And then it was with that you thought, wait a second, did you think to yourself, how can I take this to the next level?
Well, I never once in my career have mailed it in, so to speak. Mm-hmm. I've never gone to a game and just sort of punched the time clock and left because I would be, I would be short shrifting my employer and myself. I mean, I have a really strong work ethic. That work ethic came from my dad. It also came from Magic Johnson because I watched Magic as a young photographer, and he is a young player, literally bring the lunch pail every single game. I mean, it could be preseason game. It could be a meaningless game in January, It could be a playoff finals game. Didn't matter. Every game, every possession, he was involved. It really was incredible to me that a guy could be that attached, and that involved. And I took that to heart, and continues to this day. Every game I go to, I approach the same way as I did, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. Doesn't matter. The last thing I want to do is come home and be in my car, literally after a game, like kicking myself that I wasn't paying attention, or I was talking to somebody, or just wasn't centered, I wasn't present, and I missed, a Blake Griffin dunk, which, things happen, right? And technically things happen. Sometimes a ref's button is in your way. You can't get a picture. Sometimes the camera system, the strobes don't work. A lot of things out of your control. But if I can control it, I want to be the guy that at least I can go home and say, you know what, I did the best I could. I might have missed a couple, but that happens. Kobe says that he used to say that that you only miss the shots you don't take, right, or something like that.
Yeah.
So, I prided myself in really being centered and really being present when I'm at a game or on an assignment or whatever I'm doing, for my craft.
Well, seeing your long career and knowing, obviously, as I said several times, Hall of Fame photographer, I don't think that anybody here is questioning your work ethic. But when it comes to sports, it's easy to see who wins and who loses, who becomes great, and you can kind of tally those up by the amount of wins versus losses. But for a creative pursuit like photography, how do you measure greatness?
I measure greatness by how you, the viewer, react to my photos. Quite frankly, if there's an emotional response to my pictures, and now so much is so immediate, on social media. If I get responses to my photos that I just shot, that after I get home, or if I'm on the plane or whatever, and I post some photos from tonight's game. And I get reactions to it, that is the most satisfying thing to me ever. And plus, I have a lot of professional pride in myself, my own inner pride. And going back to what I said, if I know I gave 100% of my effort and did the best I could, and something happened that was out of my control, I can live with that, right? If I can control it, meaning that all the elements are coming together and I'm present in the moment, taking a page out of Phil Jackson's book, well, our book that we did together, then I'm at peace with that, really. And so I measure greatness for other photographers' work, because I'm blown away every single day when I see other photographers. You talk about John Suhu. I mean, let's talk about John for a second. I met John. He was, I think, a sophomore at USC, right? I was introduced to him by Steve Brenner, who's still the PR guy for the Dodgers. Took John under my wing. He was very shy, but he was also very good photographer. He was working for the Daily Trojan newspaper, and we bonded. And he was so easy to work with. He worked in the darkroom to start off with me. We had a darkroom at Dodger Stadium. This is when I was working for the Dodgers from '84 through '95, and a couple of years in, he had earned his way into being a photographer, like a full-time photographer. And then we brought other people in to do the lab work and kind of the grunt work that he was doing at the beginning. And look how far he's come. I mean, it's unbelievable. I mean, I didn't even shoot the '88 World Series. Once the Dodgers left Dodger Stadium after Game 2, I had to go to Madrid, Spain with the NBA, because it was the first time the NBA had taken a team, which was the Celtics, to Europe. So I had to do that. John took over. He went to Oakland, shot them winning the World Series, the whole thing in '88. Fast forward 32 years later, and he just shot them winning again,
In Texas.
And he's a beloved member of the Dodger family. Couldn't be more proud of him. We're great friends. And I follow his career, like like so many others that I follow, so many greats out there. It's a great community, great fraternity, sorority um, of photographers who we all pull for each other. We really do. And there's competition, and competition fuels you and keeps you on your toes, you know. Um, and my great friend Nat Butler, you know, my cohort, who's been doing this almost, I think Nat's been doing it 35 years, and I just finished my 39th year for the NBA. Nat's based in New York. We just spent 7 weeks together in the bubble. And we're great colleagues, great friends. We push each other a little bit, you know. Maybe we want to one-up each other every game, which is fine and great. It keeps you motivated, you know.
Sure.
And I'm very thankful for these friendships that I've developed over the years with some incredible photographers and great, you know, great people.
It's great to hear. I think in a world where on Facebook and with digital photography, there's so much, you know, quote unquote competition, that there's true admiration between you and like other greats out there in your field, and that it's not all about like who can win, who's the best, I'm gonna win, but that you can all kind of survive in the same space and respect each other's work, which I love that. And speaking of John, when I interviewed him, another thing that he attributed to learning from you was how to work with athletes as well, in the sense that oftentimes you only have moments with these players one-on-one, and you have to be able to get the image. So from your point of view, what tips do you have to not only build rapport with these top-level athletes, but still get that shot that you need in just moments?
Well, if we're talking about, let's say, a portrait shoot, right? Or, you know, a quick shoot that you would do with a player, you know, by the batting cage or after practice or whatever. But let's just call it, you know, roughly and loosely a portrait type of setup. The key, absolute key, is preparation. I mean, you cannot be fumbling around because you have very little time with these guys and women. They're professional athletes, are wonderful. They also, for the most part, have an attention span of like a bottle of water. You know, and they want to get in, they want to get out. 99% of the time, they're incredibly cooperative, and they know that you're doing something that's going to promote them in one way, shape, or form. You know, they're either doing it and making money from it if it's a commercial endorsement, or if it's an editorial thing, a magazine cover. I mean, you're there to make them look good, obviously, right? And your job is to be completely prepared. So you have to know your equipment, you have to know your setup. You can't be messing around with lighting. Things have to be locked in before the athlete shows up. And I learned my lesson very early with Magic. Okay, and I forged a wonderful friendship with Magic, on and off the court. Like I said, I think he came into the NBA a year before I started, and we grew up in the NBA together. And I started shooting a lot of his off the court stuff, you know, his family stuff, and then his endorsement stuff. And one of the very earliest shoots I did was when he was endorsing Converse. And it was a big shoot. It was a production shoot, you know, art director there. There's all kinds of people running around, and it was on a set. And he was filming a commercial, you know, somewhere. And then I had my set set up, and I had very little time with him. And it was a little complicated as to what I needed him to do. And I had a stand-in who kind of helped me sort of get everything roughed out, right? But back in the day, when we used film, we would always shoot a Polaroid, right? I mean, you had a Polaroid back. Like, you were shooting 2 1/4, you take the film back off, put the Polaroid back on the back of the Hasselblad, and, you know, you shoot that. Polaroid takes 60 seconds to process, right? So Magic comes in the set. He's jovial. He's his usual, you know, smiley self. I get him in the position I want, and then I go to take a Polaroid, and he goes, well, hold on. What are you doing? And I said, well, Magic, I got to take a Polaroid. He goes, oh, no. He says, when I come on your set, we don't do Polaroids.
Oh, wow.
He says, you be ready. I mean, and I said, okay. And didn't do a Polaroid, and I never did a Polaroid after that of him. But I did learn my lesson that you better be locked down, man. You better just know 98, 99% that you're and yes, you got to tweak things here and there once you get the person in there and do some variations as to the actual shot. But anyway, that was a very eye-opening moment. He and I laughed about that on my podcast because he remembered it.
Yeah, I bet he did. I
He
bet he
remembered
did.
it, and it made me a better photographer
Yeah.
because Polaroids are great, but they're also a little bit of a crutch. You're leaning on the Polaroid to, I don't know, to verify or kind of validate or something. Yes, I did use it on other shoots, but never with him again.
When I went to film school originally, I studied cinematography, and one of my teachers, a big lesson that he tried to instill was that failing to prepare is preparing to fail. And I've heard you say a version of this, which is luck favors the prepared. And I think that is such a great story about how you were prepared enough to that luck kind of delivered itself to you. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, Walter Yost, that's a very famous Walter Yost saying as well. Luck favors the prepared. Yeah.
Well, because it makes sense, and it really gets you on your game real quick.
Right.
So I know that.
Let me hold on one second, Reem, because it's really important for people, starting out in photography, that part of preparation is learning your equipment. Okay, you have to know how your equipment works first of all. Okay, and that comes with shooting, and then shooting more.
Yeah.
And writing things down. And when it doesn't work, understanding why it doesn't work, or you didn't get the result that you wanted, or things are overexposed, or you used the wrong lens, or whatever it is, right? Because you have to know, it has to be innate when you're on the job, even if you're an amateur photographer, you don't want to be out shooting nature. You don't want to be out shooting surfing, your kid's soccer game, and be fumbling around trying to figure out, well, how does, what do I do with this setting and blah, blah, blah. You have to learn that. And that's, it's like learning a language. You can't go to a foreign country and just think you can get by with 4 words. You have to learn the language.
Yes.
So you have to learn your equipment.
Now, this might be a large question here, but I see many photographers who are very frustrated trying to learn photography, and I feel like I see it as they're trying to learn too much too fast. Do you think that when you had first started and getting going and growing as a photographer, that same frustration also came from trying to learn too much too fast, or that it was maybe a timeline difference between taking the photo and seeing the result? Do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh yeah, well there wasn't that much to learn. I mean, no, really, honestly, I mean, I gotta give you an example. My daughter is 12, and she started to take up photography. So of course, I get her a camera, and it's all digital, and I try to teach her how to work it, and I have no freaking idea what all this stuff does in these digital cameras today. I mean, I really don't. I hate to say that, but it's true. I mean, I know the basics, of course, but to be able then to explain every dial and nuance and setting and menu and all that, we didn't have that stuff. It was a box basically. The camera had a manual, everything, and you had to learn what kind of film to use. You had to keep track of the film and had a film counter. When you got to 36, you knew you had to change film. You didn't have to deal with downloads and Photoshops and computers and workflows and all that archiving business. And I do sound like a dinosaur, but it's frustrating because, back in the day, the science of the craft of photography, learning light, right? Learning exposure, learning even composition, focus, what lenses to use. Those are the important things. Now people, you get very inundated with all the technology, and it's very hard to break down these new cameras to those 5 or 6 essentials, quite frankly. It really is. So my daughter took an online photography class right before the pandemic, and they start off by putting the camera on the manual setting, which I thought was great.
Yeah.
So she had to learn almost like I had to learn, from the beginning. Yeah.
So definitely a lot of overwhelm. Maybe not so much a time thing, but just being overwhelmed by the amount of
Yeah.
options.
And you know what? I think, and I hate to say anything against my friends at Nikon. I'm a Nikon guy. I think it's overkill, honestly. I think there's so much in these cameras. I can't imagine people using, 1/10 of the things that are available inside these
Right?
cameras. I mean, not only they do still, but they do video too.
Yeah.
I don't know,
It's a
whatever.
whole new set of menus. I
I'm
get
going
it.
off on a tangent, Raymond. I'm sorry.
Well, Andy, we're getting to the end of our time here, but I got one last question for you if
Uh-huh.
you're up for it.
Yeah.
You have multiple photographers working with you for
Hmm.
you to cover many sports events. Same day you could have multiple photographers, different locations.
Hmm. Hmm.
I want to know what's the one aspect that you look for when hiring an associate photographer, and then what do you tell them before they take the court for their first game?
Well, keep in mind that we also do events. So I'm the director of photography for AEG's
Hmm.
Staples Center and Microsoft Theater. So in addition to the teams that play in Staples Center, we have five teams that play in Staples Center. Um, we also do the concerts. We do a lot of meet and greets. We have an event today, actually, a Get Out the Vote event today at Staples Center. So photographers have to who come to me and to be considered, as part of our very small, close-knit group. Um, a personality first and foremost. You have to be able to work with others. You have to be able to roll with things. You have to be able to adjust on the fly. You have to be diplomatic. It's never about you. It's about the client. It's about the situation. And we've had every known situation that you could possibly imagine thrown at us over the years. You have to be incredibly adaptable to different kinds of assignments. Like one night I could send you to a Kings game. The next night I'm sending you to a U2 concert. The next night maybe it's an award show. The next night it could be, a camp at one of the teams is doing a youth camp. I mean, all kinds of stuff. And
Hmm.
yes, I have photographers who are more specialized in certain things than others, but I like to have sort of interchangeable personalities and also people who can bring different skills to the table, because keeps my clients happy, quite frankly. And follow the protocols, follow the rules, follow the procedures that we have, the workflows. All of my clients are very specific how they like things shot, how they like things delivered, um, how they like things fulfilled afterwards for archiving purposes, all of that. So, it's a big enchilada. I mean, it really is. It's not just you're a good photographer and you take nice concert pictures. It goes way past that. So we have very few openings because we are very tight knit. Right now, we have very little to no work, which is kind of interesting. I'm in my office here where there's usually 3 or 4 people, doing stuff, and right now it's just me. But that's okay, and it will come back. This will all be part of all our histories, and I believe live events will come back when they're ready, and we'll be
Hmm.
back to work.
Andy, I appreciate you. I appreciate your time. I appreciate all of your experience and coming on and sharing everything that you did in the little amount of time that we had today. It's been fantastic. But before I let you go, I know
Mhm.
that there's going to be listeners who are interested in learning more about you and how to follow you along online. So can you share where the listeners can keep up with you online?
Yeah, thanks, Raymond. First of all, it's been a blast talking to you too. So thank you very much. I know it was a little hard to track down because I was in the bubble there for 7 weeks.
I'm glad that
Kind
we
of,
made it work.
yeah, but thank you for that. And the opportunity to talk to your audience because, it all starts somewhere. It started for me somewhere, it started for you somewhere. And I love talking to new people who have gotten the bug of photography. So hopefully, we did some good today. So my photography can be found on Instagram primarily at ADB Photo Inc. Also, there's a website, ADB Photo Inc. My platform that kind of my other life that I have is called Legends of Sport, where I host a podcast. I just actually released my 100th podcast, which is amazing. So that's Legends of Sport on at Legends of Sport on Instagram. And the podcast can be found on Apple, Spotify. We're distributed and partnered with the LA Times. So if you're in the LA area, you can also find us on the LA Times app. They have a podcast tab on the app as well as their online platform, but Apple, Spotify primarily. And YouTube, we're releasing all of our podcasts and video on YouTube as well. So it's called Legends of Sport on YouTube. So, we love getting new followers. We love getting people's opinions. We have a blog called legendsofsport.blog where you can interact with our blog. And we're going to have a new website soon. So stay tuned for that. And we'll announce that on our social media, which is Legends of Sport on Instagram.
Perfect. Of course, I'm going to link to all those things in the show notes. But Andy, thank you again so much for coming on and sharing everything that you did.
Well, Raymond, it's been a blast. And I love somebody like you who keeps the fire burning in the photography community. And anything I can do in the future, you let me know. And, stay well, okay? And everybody out there, stay well, wear your mask. We'll get through this together.
What did I tell you? That dude has stories. Oh, man. So great. So awesome to listen to a photographer who is seasoned and has seen it all and has, remembered, or what's the phrase? He's probably forgotten less than I'll ever know, which is just, you can feel that when you talk to somebody with that amount of experience. And it was so much fun to talk to Andy today. My biggest takeaway from this, and I hope that you got this takeaway as well, is that you have to know your gear inside and out. There's just no way around it. That story that he shared with Magic is just because luck favors the prepared. And when Andy said that his daughter first started learning photography, and they had to start with manual, I mean, that seals it right there, right? While it seems scary if you're new to photography to learn manual, there's really only just 3 settings that you have to deal with. And what sounds scarier to me, honestly, is not knowing why my camera is doing something that I don't like, not knowing why it's taking bad photos, not knowing how to fix it. If you're in a situation and you see the photo in your head and you're trying to take it, but you're in some program mode and your camera is just screwing the whole thing up and you don't know how to get the shot that you want, that to me is scarier than learning how to shoot manual. So, whether you learn manual through me and the Otter to Amazing online course, or you scour YouTube trying to teach yourself, having that technical skill and learning how to shoot in manual, I promise you, will grow your ability to see the scene in your head and know how to capture it. So, again, what a great interview. Andy, if you're listening right now, thank you so much for sharing everything that you did. I really hope that you as the listeners enjoyed this one as much as I did. So until next week, I want you to make do. I want you to make more. I want you to do more, and I want you to make do with the gear that you got, because listen to me, I promise you, it is better than you think. All right, stay safe. Talk soon.
Thank you for listening to the Beginner Photography Podcast. If you enjoy the show, consider leaving a review in iTunes. Keep shooting, and we'll see you next week.